now let's talk about the Rohingya and the situation in Myanmar. Because in Myanmar, the genocide is happening at the hands of Buddhists, these Burmese Buddhists, which are ethnically and religiously distinct from the Rohingya Muslims, and also coups involved that are exacerbating the situation. So to understand the situation with the Rohingya, we have to understand a little bit about Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Okay, so you see on the Bay of Bengal, near the Indian Ocean, here's Myanmar. And where are the Rohingya? The Rohingya are on this western side, on the coast. So this area, this is the Rakhine province. And this is a very contested area because it's very geostrategically significant. But the Rohingya are primarily from this area in Myanmar. In 2017, 8 years ago, you had the military junta within the Myanmar central government who began to attack the Rohingya. Why did they do this? Well, there was a pretext for this, for why they attacked. There's a group of the Rohingya Muslims that they have a kind of resistance force, like a rebel force, who are advocating for rights in Myanmar because the Rohingya are a disenfranchised and oppressed group. They have been for most of Myanmar's history since Myanmar achieved independence in 1948. So the Rohingya have always been treated as a fifth column. They are the poorest ethnicity. And the way to understand how the legal system in Myanmar treats the Rohingya, you have to understand the 1982 citizenship law. The citizenship law identifies 152 ethnicities that are officially part of Myanmar, and the Rohingya were just deliberately excluded from that. So that means the Rohingya were denied citizenship. They could not be considered equal citizens within Myanmar, and they've been treated as basically refugees in their own country, even though they've been in the Rakhine area for generations. But the ethnic and religious majority, the Buddhist Burmese, have been treating them as this fifth column within the country, and they don't have citizenship, they can't vote, they have no political power, they have no political agency. So there was a paramilitary force, resistance force that the Rohingya formed called the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, the ARSA, I guess I'll call it. And the ARSA was attacking some police stations in 2017, and that served as a pretext for a massive crackdown that resulted in genocide, massacres, genocide, forced migration, and 700,000 of the Rohingya were pushed out of the Rakhine province to the northwest into Bangladesh. So if you go Cox's Bazar here, this is where the refugee camps of the Rohingya are, close to the border. And that's where they've been for the past 8 years. And the Rohingya are in the news now, these days, because this is the 8-year anniversary of this forced migration and genocide. And also now there's humanitarian aid is running out. The transitional government of Bangladesh is having a hard time supporting these refugees. So the amount of money that they can give the refugees, the supplies that they can give to the refugees are slowly diminishing and running out. So this is causing a crisis. And then you have within Myanmar itself renewed hostility towards the Rohingya that remain, and there's renewed clashes. And this time it's not the military junta that is the cause of the conflict. It's another party, the Arakan army. The Arakan army is also the Burmese Buddhist ethnicity. They're not Muslim, they're not Rohingya, but they're also part of the Rakhine province. And they want independence from the military junta. So let's get into more of the background of what happened. So obviously 2017, you have this attack, an ethnic cleansing campaign against the Rohingya. It was on the basis of an attack against the Rohingya attacking some police outposts. Some have speculated that this was a false flag because the military junta and the centralized military forces in Myanmar, they had a planned attack against the Rohingya. They were planning in advance to attack the Rohingya and to massacre them and to force them out. That was already planned. So then people speculate that maybe the ARSA attacks on the police outposts, this was just a false flag to justify a crackdown on the Rohingya. Some speculate this. The official story is no, the ARSA was just defending itself. What's interesting is the ARSA is not tied to any kind of jihadist group. They're not tied to ISIS. They're not tied to any kind of quote unquote international jihad. They have some connections to some Saudi trained preachers, but it's not like an international jihadi organization. They purely are trying to defend the Rohingya using arms. They say this is a defensive jihad. We don't have citizenship. We're being oppressed, so we're defending ourselves. This is what they claim. I'm not defending the ARSA because many Rohingya actually criticize the ARSA. They say the ARSA is actually forcing Rohingya men to join their force and to fight. Rohingya themselves are divided on the legitimacy and whether the ARSA is a force of good or not. So there's internal divisions there. So because of this renewed attention crisis situation that's unfolding in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, now there's increased international attention on the Rohingya. So what is actually happening when it comes to the history of Burma that is exacerbating this? Well, in 2017, you had the massacres, but then in 2021, there was a coup. So again, Myanmar is split. This is back in 2021. You had a split between the civilian government and then the military complex. The military complex felt that they were losing control. You had these democratic institutions that were gaining power. And this was led by this Nobel Prize winning Burmese woman, Aung San Suu Kyi, I believe is how you pronounce her name. She won the Nobel Prize in 1991. And she's leading a kind of civilian democratic process that ostensibly is supposed to be diverse, like representing the nation of Myanmar. But people don't like that. People don't like a kind of unity civilian government. And the military was using racism against the Rohingya to rally support, to rally populist support to entrench their power. And then they did a coup in 2021. And Aung San Suu Kyi was put in prison as a Nobel Prize winner. And people weren't really too upset about that. They weren't too pressed about that. Why? Because when the 2017 massacres were happening by the same military junta, Aung San Suu Kyi didn't say jack. She didn't say anything to defend the Rohingya or to criticize the military. And this brought a lot of international criticism. People said, you're a Nobel Prize winner for peace, and you are supposed to represent a kind of liberal democratic spirit for a democratic liberal Myanmar, not a kind of Myanmar ethno-state of extreme populist right-wing extremists, but you're staying silent on the genocide of the Rohingya. So Aung San got a lot of international criticism for this, and people were speculating that she really had no choice. The Aung San simps are saying she didn't have a choice. Why? Because the military was going to coup her and she was going to lose power. She was going to be put in prison. So she had to stay silent. That's what eventually happened. That's exactly what happened in 2021. She's in prison now. The military couped and they took over and she's in prison. So Myanmar, similar to Sudan that we saw, is a country that is plagued by civil strife. It's been happening since 2021. And there are between 60 and 200 different factions that are all fighting. And they fall along two basic lines. There's the pro-military group who are the populists, ethno-nationalists. They support the military. And then on the other side, you have mainly the National Unity Government, the NUG. And they're actually pro-Rohingya. They're pro-diversity, pro-democracy. And maybe they're doing that just to get international support against the military junta. Those are the two main factions. And then there's like different ethnic groups or Christian groups that form their own paramilitary organizations. They're militants and they're fighting. And in certain parts, it's not just guerrilla warfare, it's conventional warfare. So the Myanmar is also one of these failed states, and it's because of military coups. And this is not something that just affects Muslims. These are Buddhists. In this case, it's just that the Muslims are once again the victims of this. So why is Rakhine province here so important? Number one, it's resource rich. Number two, it's on the coast of the Bay of Bengal, and that's significant. Why? Because this is what China needs. China is very concerned about having access to the Indian Ocean, and they need a land access. So China is accessing the Indian Ocean through this land bridge through Myanmar, through the Rakhine province, to this deep sea port located at Chukpu. I think it's pronounced Chukpu. China needs to be able to access the Indian Ocean, to access the Red Sea, to access the Persian Gulf, because 80% of oil imports of China come from this side of the world, from the Indian Ocean side. And how can you get from the Indian Ocean to China? Well, there's this huge land barrier that means that China can't directly access the Indian Ocean. They have to access it through this strait, the Strait of Malacca, another very small small, in the narrowest part, it's only 3 kilometers wide. This strait here between Indonesia and Malaysia. So imagine all of China, not all, but a massive percentage of its energy, oil needs, economic needs in terms of imports and exports, a massive amount of that, a huge percentage depends on access to this strait, the Malacca Strait. This creates a dilemma, and the Chinese call it the Malacca dilemma, because if the United States goes to war with China, the first thing that the US is going to do is to close this strait to economically cripple the Chinese. So the Chinese are very invested in finding an alternative. And that's what a lot of the Belt and Road Initiative is about, is providing land routes through Asia and building infrastructure, railroad infrastructure, and seaport, deep seaport infrastructure to bypass this strait. It's significant, actually, that look, these major ports, or these straits rather, whether it's the Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Hormuz, actually in the Persian Gulf, or the Strait of Malacca, Muslims are the ones who are controlling this. Muslims have control, ostensibly, seemingly, the Muslims have control of all of these critical choke points that are vital for the global economy. The Suez Canal, another one. It's Muslims that are the countries that ostensibly should be able to control, because it's on paper, they're the countries that are surrounding these important geopolitical locations. But as we know, it's just on paper. All of these countries have to bend the knee to the more powerful forces. That's the unfortunate reality. Okay, so going back to Myanmar, you have the Chakpyu deep sea port, and that's what China really relies on. And so they've created a land bridge through Myanmar, and the military junta is, taking advantage of that situation because they need the support of China to remain in power, whereas the opposition parties like the NUG, they rely mainly on Western support. And so the Rakhine province, not only because of its resources, but also because of its access to the sea, this is very critical geopolitically. So that's what's causing the fighting for control. And you have the Arakans, who are Burmese. You have the Tatmadaw, is the military junta, the military government. They are fighting the Arakan army, the AA. And now the ARSA, the Rohingya forces, are actually allied with the Tatmadaw. So the Tatmadaw are working with the Rohingya in certain capacities against the Arakan who want control of the Rakhine province. And the whole goal, what happens to the Rohingya is that they get divided. It's a divide and conquer strategy. Keep them split. One group is allied with the Arakan, another group is allied with the Tatmadaw, both of which are Burmese, Buddhists. And the Muslims remain divided. The Muslims remain the victims.